Renée and Ilse with their mother, Marta helping his mother downsize from her North London house into a flat some 15 years ago. Francis Morton came across an old shoebox crammed with correspondence. Rummaging through the pile, he picked out one of the few documents in English. It was a telegram addressed to his mother, Renée Stranska Morgenstern, in Cambridge and sent on July 5, 1945. It read: Marta Charles Ilse Peter, the 15th of October 1944, deported from Terezin to Auschwitz. For Francis, 64, a retired management consultant, it was a stark confirmation of the fate that had befallen the branch of the family he had never known. His maternal grandmother Marta, grandfather Karl, Aunt Ilse and her husband Peter had been deported from the Nazis' Showpiece concentration camp near Prague, Theresienstadt, Terezin to Auschwitz, soon to become as infamous a byword for the Holocaust as Auschwitz. They never returned. It was a real shock when I read it, and I was trying to imagine the effect it must have had on my mother, Renée, when she got it in 1945, he says. I showed it to her and said, "What's this?" but she refused to talk about it and would not let me see any of the hundreds of letters in the shoebox. She had placed a wall across the past and nothing could breach it. But Francis had carefully noted where the box was stored, and after his mother's death in 2006 at the age of 87, he was determined to examine the contents properly and have the letters, most written in German, some in Czech, translated. Growing up with no wider family, I felt that history began when I was born. As a small child, if I asked my mother why we had no relations at all, she would just say that they died in the war. Later, the explanation was they were killed by the Germans. As an adult, when I asked my mother why she never talked about the Holocaust, she would say, "I was focused on moving on, not looking back." I imagine she also felt some guilt that she survived when her family perished. Renée survived because her father found her a position as a domestic with a family living in Cambridge. The timing was fortuitous. She left Prague, aged 18, a fortnight before the signing of the Munich Agreement on September 30, 1938, the first step towards the eventual subjugation of Czechoslovakia under the Nazi flag. 2 days after the signing, Renée received a letter from her mother, Marta, which said history has never seen such treason and cowardly retreat from brutal violence before. Her elder sister, Ilse, writes, "What do the English say about Chamberlain in Paris? He is called Jamie Berlin." The letters, some 500 in all, are a compelling mixture of the personal and political. Like any mother, Marta worries about how hard her daughter, who had grown up in a cultured, middle-class household with a cook and a live-in maid, is having to work. It amazes me that they, the Wishart family in Cambridge where Renée is staying, demand so much work from you. I could not do it to abuse somebody so much, but the English are renowned for that. Nevertheless, Marta and Karl are determined that their other daughter, Ilse, should also find refuge in England. Renée left with elder sister Ilse in March 1939, as Czechoslovakia's last vestige of independence is snuffed out and the repression of the Jews becomes harsher. Marta writes to Renée, "It is most important for us to get Ilse out of here as soon as possible. But I have heard today that to get a British visa, £200, roughly £12,500 at today's value, is required for 2 years as a bank guarantee. Who can you ask to do such a thing against the odds?" Ilse obtains a visa in June 1939, but by now, Czechoslovakia has become the German protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia and it requires a Gestapo stamp to get out. Ilse fails to get one and in 1940 marries a young artist, Peter Keen, who achieved posthumous acclaim as the librettist of an opera called The Emperor of Atlantis, written in Theresienstadt, and banned by the Nazis. The letters paint a vivid and often heartbreaking picture of the anguish of a once thriving Jewish community that fears the worst as war approaches and is prepared to leave everything behind to escape persecution. Many are learning Spanish because, though Europe and the US have closed their doors, a number of Latin American states are still offering refuge. The letters are full of references to friends and acquaintances fleeing to Uruguay, Ecuador, Brazil and elsewhere. But for those unable to escape, there is mounting despair. In June, Marta writes, "Do you remember little overweight Hans, who followed Bessie and Edna? Imagine, his mother tried to kill herself and the boy with gas, in a moment of desperation. Renée, pictured in London in later life, the child is dead, but she now has to face the burden of living on, thanks to the wonders of medicine. Isn't that terrible?" Reading these lines now, Francis Morton wonders about the cumulative impact on his mother of the news from Prague drift and these letters from home over a tumultuous 4-year period from 193,842. But all her life, Renée was nothing if not resilient. I accompanied her on her first visit back to Prague in 1988, and even when we went to Terezín and saw an exhibition of paintings by Peter Keen, including watercolors and sketches of her mother, sister and grandmother, she didn't become emotional, he says. I suspect suppressing her feelings had become second nature. For Frances, hindsight invests the correspondence with an impending sense of dread, knowing what happened to the family. They, of course, can't possibly foresee the gas chambers. But the overall tone of the letters is increasingly one of pessimism as their community shrinks inexorably. As Marta writes in November 1939, every day brings new surprises, so many sad stories, often a lifetime's goodbyes. We see so many dear friends walking into an unknown future, and so much more. And no one could fail to empathize with Marta when she writes to her daughter in 1939 in an undated letter, "It is 3 o'clock in the morning, dawn is near and I can't sleep. It's only me, thinking of you with all my heart, my sweetheart. I would give anything to see you for a couple of hours, to embrace you and listen to your dear voice." In Paris, he is called Jamie Berlin. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, her wish was never granted. In 1941, Ilse and Peter Keen were sent to Terezín as the advance guard of the newly constructed concentration camp. René's grandmother, Clara, followed in 1942 at the age of 88 and died within a week of arrival. Marta's last letter to England before being forced out of her Prague home was written 75 years ago, on July 25, 1942. After that, silence, until that fateful telegram sent at the war's end. For Francis, excavating the past has put him in his mother's shoes at the war's end. When Renée had started a university degree, her professor told her, "You carry the weight of 5,000 years of Jewish history on your shoulders. Through these letters, I've inherited that burden."